Okay, so before we go into the lecture, I want to go over some of your comments, which were actually pretty good. Some of you are really starting to get the text. That's good. Um, well done, Al-Hadai. You really got it, even though you didn't agree. So that was good. Um, Ho is asking, okay, if I can read this. Oh, yeah. So Ho is asking an interesting question, right? He's getting the sense when he's reading the text that Levinas doesn't believe in God, right? So, so yes, right? It's true that Levinas doesn't believe in God in the way that we believe in God, right? Remember we talked about this, right? God, Levinas doesn't believe in a transcendent God there to help us, right? That we can pray to, and he fixes all our problems, right? No, he doesn't believe in God in that way, for sure. But he still has a sense of who, right? He still has, how shall I put it, a sense of God, I guess, but in a very different way than we are used to, which we're going to find out today. Does that help you a little bit, Ho? Where is Ho? Okay, great. And then I think it's Janakopoulos is asking, I can't read my writing anymore. Whew, what did I write here? Yeah. It's the same issue everyone is asking. What does he write so complicated? We'll talk about this in a second. I want to just go over also, everybody's asking this question about what does Levinas mean by the disturbance? Uh, right? Levinas talks about this disturbance. So I'll anticipate on what I'm going to say today, but simply the disturbance is the way that the other enters on our lives, right? The other as other doesn't mean just people. Some people can be really great to be around and they never disturb you. These people are not revealing themselves as other yet, right? When they start to disturb you, that's when that part of them which is other starts to manifest itself, right? As long as the other is like you, there is no disturbance, right? As long as your spouse or your child or your friends are like you, there is no disturbance. But there's also no otherness, right? As soon as the other becomes a disturbance, that's when they are actually becoming an other. Are you seeing what I'm saying? Let me give you an example. I don't think I'm clear. Suppose you're dating someone, right? And everything's going well, all good. They're like you. They like what you like. They hang out, they like the same books, the same music, and so they're all the same like you. You're gonna be doing great, right? As soon as they start to be different, there's going to be a disturbance, right? But at the same time, so the disturbance is not comfortable, right? When the other starts to become different, right? They don't think like you, they don't have the same political ideas, they don't like that singer you love, right? They practice a different religion, right? They have a different connection to God than you. Okay, now there is a disturbance, right? And so what Levinas is saying, disturbance is good. As soon as there is a disturbance, means you are finally accessing or encountering another, right? And this is a broadening of your life. So as long as there's no conflict or disturbance or crisis, you're not yet open to the point, you haven't yet encountered the other. Your universe is still very small. It's your little universe, right? Disturbance means, or conflict between you and someone means, otherness, meaning possibility of expansion of yourself to now broaden your horizons to include the other. Are you following what I'm saying? If you are, put your hand in the screen if you see what I'm saying, right? So this is kind of Levinas is telling us, right, that in a way disturbance or conflict or problems in a relationship, whether it's with your parents or your child or your spouse, this is a good sign. It means that this person is other to you, and the fact that you are now, right, and it's an opportunity for you to expand. Any type of conflict is an opportunity for you to expand, to love deeper, to be more compassionate, to be more accepting, right? So that's what's going on when he's talking about the disturbance, right? um, and then, of course, someone asked again, enigma, what is that? Again, remember, enigma is that which we cannot understand versus phenomenon, that which we can understand. And God belongs to the dimension of enigma, right? He's both present and absent. That's the enigma, here and not here. He's there, but we still have some questions, right? That's what we talked about last time. Last thing I want to talk about is why all of you are asking this, right? Ad nauseum. You're asking this. Why is it that Levinas writes so complicated? Okay. How many of you have taken physics? Put your hand in the screen. Or chemistry or biology? One of the three. Okay, great. Now, were you asking your professors why this physics is so complicated or this chemistry is so complicated and why doesn't, this textbook make it simpler? No, right? You took it for granted that the universe is complex. And so when we talk about the laws of the universe, it's going to be a complex discourse, which takes semesters to figure out chemistry, right? It's the same here. We're not talking about the universe, right? We're talking about human nature. Human nature is complex, right? And so you need a complex discourse. This is why Levinas can't simplify. Of course, he could just tell you, be nice, right, to each other, which is kind of what he's aiming for. But he's not just saying what we should, he's talking about, he's describing human nature. And human nature is intricate, complex. And so, yes, just like you are accepting that physics has the right to be complex, chemistry has the right to be complex, because we're dealing with the complexity of the cosmos. Likewise, when we're talking about philosophy, which is dealing with human nature, it also has the right to be complex. Okay, can I never hear you complain about the difficulty of the reading? Put your hand in the screen. Right? He's talking about something complex. He can't dumb it down for you, right? Can't dumb down human nature, because human nature is very complex, and he's trying to describe it in its complexity without dumbing it down. That's why you have something which is complex and difficult, because, to be honest, human beings are very difficult to deal with and to understand. So this is really, he's trying to really enter that dimension which is as complex as the cosmos, right? Okay. All right, let's continue. Let's get into the text for today. I'm going to go into the second part, right, of what I promised you, which is ethics as a path to God, right? Last time, let's review briefly last time, right? I mentioned, we talked about how God is both present and absent, right? And that in a way, the reason for that is that, he is beyond our understanding, must be beyond our understanding. Otherwise, he's just going to be a projection of the self, which is what Nietzsche was saying, right? The fact that there is doubt and confusion is showing you're not projecting this. Does that make sense? This is actually a great argument. I just came up with it now. Make sure you listen. Okay, listen carefully, right? I'm going to say it again, because this is a great response to Nietzsche. Levinas is saying the fact that God is confusing, that we have questions and doubts and frustrations and anger issues towards God, right, is the sure proof that God is not a projection in our minds, right? If he was a projection, it would be clear-cut, it would make sense, we would be happy, right? And so the fact that we're swimming in a sea of confusion when it comes to God is proof that we are dealing with something bigger than our mind, and therefore this is not a projection. Are you following me? Put your hand. Right, this is very important. Great way to answer Nietzsche, right, on that one. So that's a real good way that Levinas is showing that God is not a projection. Otherwise, we would not be so confused about it, right, or angry about it, or frustrated, or, questioning and doubting. That the fact that our mind is struggling with this shows that we're dealing with something beyond our mind, and therefore not a projection. Let me write this in the chat, right? The fact that our mind is struggling, right, with the concept of God shows that we are dealing with something bigger than our minds. Therefore, it cannot be a projection, which would be something that our mind has fabricated and is comfortable with, right? Most of us are not comfortable with the concept of God or with God. We have questions, we have issues. Okay, so, and Levinas would warn us, right? Beware of becoming too comfortable. Beware, because you might bring on something like Job brought on himself, right? Job was very comfortable, which we studied, right? And then God was like, oh, you're comfortable. Let me give you a taste, right, of who I really am, right? So beware of becoming too comfortable, because inevitably, you will be disturbed in your comfort, right? God, as the ultimate other, is disturbance. If you're not feeling a disturbance, you're not feeling God, right? I mean, it's okay to have moments of peace, but they cannot stay. right? You cannot stay in these moments of peace too long, feeling like you got a hang of it, like everything's good, like you get God and you get his plan for you and you're clear, right? Because God inevitably will come back and disturb you over and over again, and you shouldn't be surprised when it happens, right? These are revelation upon revelation, right? So that's a warning Levinas is giving some of us who are too complacent in our relationship with God. We are too comfortable. He says, inevitably the disturbance, God will have to disturb us again to break our comfort, right? Break our narrow, comfortable position, right? Does that make sense? So he's both talking to those who are all confused and those who are clear. And he's actually privileging the confused ones, right? Like Maimonides. Okay, great. Where was I? I don't even know how I got there. Oh yeah, we were reviewing. Okay, so we saw that. So we saw that for Levinas, right? God is also difficult to grasp, also because of this seduction, right? God, in a way, is entering our lives slowly. He's trickling in, right? To the degree that we are open, he is coming closer and closer. So it is also out of respect for our space, for the rhythm of our heart, right? That God is present and absent and present and absent, giving himself a little bit at a time, right? So we know that Levinas turns his back on the seduction route, right? He doesn't want to have a vertical relationship. He doesn't want to have a personal relationship with God. He turns his back on this. Why? Because out of respect for the victims, right, who were not comforted, he himself will refuse any type of personal relationship which might be comforting, right, in the end. Okay, so he shifts now. We're going to shift with him. We are now entering a different approach to God, and we must be very careful for today. Be prepared. He's going to completely restructure our concept of God, right? He is going to leave behind the typical concept we have of God sitting on a throne, answering our prayers, saving us, right? And he's going to shift this gaze from up to down. So today we should be ready to shift our gaze, our vision of God, from looking up to looking down, right? For him, God is not to be found up, right? Gazing upwards, we will miss God, right? Okay, so let's talk about this. So Levinas talks about shifting our gaze down. Why? Because he believes that after the Holocaust, right, such a God in heaven, right, sitting there answering our prayers is obscene, right? This God doesn't exist as far as he's concerned, right? He didn't experience any saving grace. He didn't experience any presence of God, any intervention in history as far as he's concerned, as well as the 6 million Jews who were genocided in the Holocaust. This type of God doesn't exist. And to still think of a God as existing like this is really a slap in the face of every single victim of the Holocaust, right? So he's actually thinking that to still believe in such a God after the Holocaust is not only misguided, but it's disrespectful, right, to those who did not, right? So he's only your God, not their God. God intervenes for you. Well, what about them, right? That's the question he's asking, right? How dare we? And he's going very far, right? How dare we still believe that God helps us and not them, right? And kind of ignore the fact that God did not help them, right? Okay, so he's going to turn the gaze from this vision of God as, helping us to a very different vision. And for him, God is still there, right? But he is now to be found in a very different form. And for Levinas, God, actually, let me ask you, right? Where does Levinas find God now after the Holocaust? Let's see if some of you got it. Al-Hadai, go ahead.
With the powerless.
Yes, very good, Al-Hadai. Right, and Karachi is saying here on earth and our suffering, so most of you got it, right? And who is that? Janakopoulos, you want to add? Janakopoulos, go ahead.
He means like among the peoples,
Yeah.
because God can be found within each and every one of us, and through helping each other. Which you're saying that Levinas is telling everyone to be nice to each other, right? In a way, he's saying that if you are nice to each other, you're being nice to God. You know, you're doing good things for God as well.
Okay,
So
very
that's how I take it.
yes, you all three of you understood it very well. Right, very good. Right, so now we have to prove this, right? Levinas is saying this, but we have to see how he argues for this, right? Basically, Levinas is saying that God today, after the Holocaust, can only be found in what he calls the face of the other. He adds a concept. He says the trace of God, right, is found in the face of the other. So let's talk about this concept, which you certainly have read. He mentions it over and over again, trace, right? Let's talk a little bit about that. What is a trace? Can anyone tell me what is a trace? When you leave a trace, what is that? Here a definition, just to start out with. What does it mean to leave a trace? What's a trace?
To leave a little something of you behind, you know, so that somebody can find you.
Okay, yes, good. Right, for example, you're at the beach, right, and you're walking in the sand. You leave footsteps, and then you're gone, but the footsteps still, right? Footsteps is you being both there and not there, right? Footsteps is a trace of your presence. You're not there anymore, but there is this footstep testifying to your presence, right? And yes, leaving a trace is like leaving a sign. Okay, so now, so when Levinas is saying God is in the other, he's not saying the other is God, right? He's saying the trace of God. God has left something of himself in the other, has left a trace of himself in the other. God, of course, is completely gone, but there is a trace of him cut in the features of every human being in this earth, right? Karuchi, you have a question.
No, not necessarily a question, but I wanted to expand upon the idea of trace or the context of it in this case. I think, you know, one of the definitions of trace is to copy by drawing over the lines or superimpose on another image. And I think that at least when I think of it, that's how I feel Levinas meant. Like, you know, we could see the image of God or the being of God in us through the copy of his image that we live, you know?
Yeah, certainly, of course, Levinas, with his Jewish background, has this in the back of his head, right? He's speaking a secular language, but yes, this is how it would translate, or this is where he's coming from. Absolutely, right? We're in the image of God. We are not God, but we are the reflection of God, right? And so Levinas uses here the word trace, right? Same idea. Very good, right? So now, of course, okay. So now, I mean, you know, when you think about it, you're like, okay, well, how, right? I mean, when we see each other, we don't necessarily see a trace of God, right? Especially when the person is impoverished, because Levinas seems to be emphasizing the fact that it's the downtrodden who are the most powerful, who give us the most powerful vision of God. So, I mean, you know, when you're walking by a beggar in Manhattan, I mean, you don't really see immediately, that's not the first thing comes to your mind, right? That here's the trace of God, right? So how does he argue for this, that we carry this? Also, right, most uh, analytic philosophy, right, most science, right, would say, wait, no, we're just, you know, evolved animals, right? We don't have any special traits, right? So he's really saying something which is revolutionary, right? In our context of the way we see human beings, right? In the way that we, in our anthropology, right? The anthropology that we have in the 21st century, right, is the idea that we are simply animals that are a little more evolved, like we have a great brain, bigger, but we don't have anything special, right? Levinas seems to be saying, yes, there is something special. So most people would be like, well, how are you not, you know, being all religious right now, right? What's your proof that we are more than just sophisticated animals, right? So I will give you today, it's not in this text, but I will give you two proofs that show that for Levinas, argue that there is a trace of God within each human being. So first of all, this is the argument from torture, which we'll talk about. And number two, this is the argument from compassion. Okay, so we're going to look at these two arguments. And this is how, in other texts, right, he argues for the fact that human beings carry the trace of God, right? So the argument from torture is certainly from his firsthand experience with torture. I mean, remember, he was a prisoner. He certainly must have witnessed scenes of torture, if even before, right? You could just walk in the streets when the Nazis were in power and see torture going on, right? This was a very common occurrence. So he's talking certainly from experience when he says this, and so he's simply describing the event of someone being tortured, and he notices, right, that the torture is not really aiming to inflict pain, right? Otherwise, he would do it and then stop after a while, right? The torture is aiming at something else, which is why the torture cannot stop, right? If it was just aiming to inflict pain, you give 100 lashes and they send them to the cell. But the torturer seems to be obsessed with something else. Does anybody know what the torturer really is after? And it's not information like we are led to believe. I'm talking about somebody who's sadistic, not the FBI, right? Somebody who is sadistic and who just can't stop. What are they trying to do? Adu, tell us.
Would it be to like break their will?
Exactly, right? So the torture is not just about causing pain or getting information. It's about breaking somebody's spirit, right? The torturer is aiming at something beneath the shell of the body, because you have so many cases where the person's body is completely destroyed and the guy is still right? What is he doing? The body is half dead and the guy is still at it. Why? Because he's sensing beneath that body something that he cannot destroy. This is what it is. This is what enrages the torturer, right? Let me write this down, right? What enrages the torturer is that it's not that he wants to cause suffering. What enrages, right, the torturer, I'm writing it here, is that there is something beneath the body which is resisting, which he senses he cannot break, right? And that's why he's just hitting and hitting and hitting, because the body's already half dead and here he is still hitting. Why? Because he's sensing something is escaping him. There is something he cannot kill. That's why Levinas, in many passages, he says the other is the one we cannot kill, right? What does he mean by that, right? Of course we can kill. What he means is that there is always something. Even you kill the person, you destroy them, you demean them, you take away everything, you strip them of their dignity. Still, there is something you have not reached. There is something you have not mastered and something you have not possessed. And this is what drives the sadistic torturer crazy, right? Am I making sense? Are you following this, everybody? Okay, so that thing that the torturer is trying to destroy and cannot destroy, this is what Levinas says. That thing is the trace of God in us. That thing that the torturer cannot break and is trying to break, right? Cannot demean and is trying to demean. That thing that cannot even, he's trying to get to it and he can't. That thing is the trace of God within us, right? So Levinas is sensing within every scene of torture, there is something which resists the torture. Even if the guy is like unconscious, right? Still there is something that he senses and that also the torturer senses has resisted him, right? Okay, I'm seeing a couple questions. Ahmed and then Janakopoulos, go ahead.
I have a question in relation to Nietzsche with this, if you don't mind me by asking it. So if Nietzsche was put in the Jews during the Holocaust in their position, he was tortured, and they were telling him to give up his atheistic view, but he wouldn't. Would that also be an argument against his argument?
No, because it's not about resisting in the name of God, right? It's about resisting. It's not even a conscious resistance, right? So yes, you're right. Some people get tortured for their beliefs and they are hanging on to their beliefs, and it's their beliefs, which you seem to be saying is what is the trace of God. But here we're talking about people who have no beliefs, are not even resisting. And yet you can sense, as the guy is ripping them apart, there is something that is not touched by that. It's a human quality. Does that make sense, Ahmed? Good. So yeah, so it's not about, right? It's not about resisting in the name of, right? Yes, you have that, right? And this is very, this shows that there is an absolute. But here Levinas is talking about an absolute which is inherent to our human condition. Whether we believe in God or not, there is always something you cannot control. Just ask your parents how they feel about you. And they will tell you what's most frustrating, right, for parents with their kids, is that there's always something they cannot understand or control, right? This is the same thing, right? Not that your parents are torturing you or anything, God forbid, but this is the idea, right? There's, within all of us, there is something which the sadistic torturer cannot get to. Even if I'm completely destroyed, he did not kill this part of me. Okay, good. Okay, Janakopoulos, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to that, Professor. So in Christianity, we have countless martyrs, and martyrs are people that saints that have died for their faith, and they go through such terrible, terrible tortures. Some even worse than what they went through in the Holocaust. And I agree with you completely, because it's that same thing. You could take away their body, break their bones, break whatever you want, but as long as you can't break their will and their faith in God, you haven't gotten to them. And that's exactly what the torturers wanted to do in all times.
Right, very good, right? This, you're kind of making the same point as Ahmad, right? This resisting in the name of an absolute outside of us. There's a little difference here with what Levinas is saying, because here the absolute is within. So it's not even about like having an allegiance to God, right? Yes, certainly, this is a category, right? But he's saying within us, God, right? And therefore, it's not even about having an allegiance to an absolute. And in the name of this absolute or God, I'm not going to let you, I'm not going to change my position. Here, this is somebody who has no outside absolute. It could be a complete atheist. It could be a scumbag, right? And this guy, still, you torture him, and there's still something you can't get to. And therefore, in that scumbag, you have right there the trace of God. Are you seeing how this is much deeper than just a good person being tortured? It can be it can be a jihadist for all I care, right? You're torturing somebody from ISIS. That person you cannot get to. You cannot get to, because there's still something within them, right? Although they're religious, so they still have this absolute outside, right? So I'm talking about any scumbag who's not religious, right? Right? You torture them, you still can't get to them. There's something that endures, right? Karuchi.
So I asked a question in the chat, and now that you're saying this, it seems more of a valid question. One of the definitions of trace as a word is if you use it as an action word, a verb, it means to discover through investigation. So so while all of this is going on, we're discovering that God lies within those that we're torturing, or the other that is infuriating us, because it makes us so uncomfortable. So we're figuring that out. We're realizing that we're
Yes, we're tracing God, right?
yeah, exactly. So it's like almost like an investigatory kind of
Yes,
process.
absolutely, right? You can trace their behavior. The fact that you could trace the whole situation, what's going on, to this element of God within the human being, right? No matter where he's from, what he believes, even if he's the worst criminal, something endures that you cannot possess and destroy, right? Okay, so now let's go to the second argument, which is the argument from compassion, right? And this is also something that Levinas witnessed in the camps, right? This is the scenario where you are all receiving limited amount of food. You have to eat it or you'll die, right? And you have situations where people would notice someone very sick or someone who is elderly, right? They're not even connected, they're not their family, but here they would feel compelled to give them their bread from their own mouth, right? Levinas uses that expression, right? And so what compels you to do something this sacrificial, right? What is it that compels us to help someone in need to the point that we might risk our own lives. This absurd behavior, right? This is not rational behavior for a species focused on survival, right? Because this is not even about feeding children. This is an elderly person supposed to die anyways, right? It's not rational. So this irrational behavior, right? Levinas is saying, what are you seeing in that elderly person that you feel you have to feed them, right? You are seeing, again, this infinite trace of God. You're seeing this infinite value in that person. You're sensing the command of God in the eyes of that person, right? And that is what is making you do this, right? I mean, some of us might say, oh, it's for survival's sake, we do this, right? We have an instinctual, we have to share so that the community can endure. So yes, that's one explanation that is possible. But Levinas gives an alternative explanation, which is just as possible, right? That we are sensing something powerful and divine and valuable, right, in that person. I mean, one might ask, why? This. Let me put it this way. In the animal kingdom, since we're going to always try to compare ourselves to animal for some reason, in the animal kingdom, you have, yes, the herd takes care of each other, but when you have a defective member of the herd, guess what happens to them? In the animal kingdom, many examples. Adu, you want to enlighten us?
They leave it and they just, let it be on their own, leave
Yeah.
it to die.
Systematically in the animal kingdom, since we want to compare ourselves to the instinct of survival of animals, fine, let's go look at the animal kingdom. Animal kingdom, when you have defective animals, old animals, animals who are wounded, they leave them to die. Right? That is what they do because they hinder the strength of the tribe, right? They make them slower, they make them, more easy prey, so they leave them to die. Now, here you are in the camps, bunch of defective people, weaker than you, which you should be leaving to die so you, the strong one, can survive and perpetuate the race. This is animal kingdom thinking. And here you are feeding them. You're not acting like an animal. What are you doing? You're acting like a human being. You're sensing something deeper in the eyes of that person than just survival of the herd, right? You're sensing the infinite value of that human being because they carry the trace of God. This should answer your issue, Al-Haddai, because I think you mentioned in your paper that Levinas is giving this argument from compassion, which you understood very well, but that, people do the same thing for instinct of survival. And here I'm trying to show that this is not the same thing. Are you following the reasoning, Al-Haddai?
I also think, I don't know, I always think that humans are selfish and they always have a reason behind whatever they do. So there's always something behind it. There are no selfless deeds.
So Al-Haddai, you're making a very strong statement with no support. Where is your support that this is how human beings function? Tell me.
I guess I said that what I see is that I'm just saying.
So you're right. I mean, certainly we have a strong drive towards selfishness and so forth, right? But why not imagine, right, that we also have a strong drive for compassion, right? I think Kant, which you should read, I think would help, talks about two forces within us, right? One which is selfish and one which is selfless, and he's saying we are both, right? So there are many, I mean, most philosophers say we are pure animals, right? But there are some philosophers who say we have something more, and I think Levinas is part of that school of thought. So for neither, by the way, do we have evidence, right? We have no evidence that we are pure animals, and we have no evidence that we have something more, right? We have only interpretation, right? So what I'm inviting you to do is consider this other interpretation, right? Because there's no evidence for neither, right? So Levinas is offering simply a different interpretation, which I think holds its ground to a certain degree, especially when you see the differences between the animal kingdom and us, right? So there is something more than instinct going on, at least in that situation where you're feeding the defective. That makes no sense, right? It's not perpetuating the species, not helping you, not helping them because they're going to die anyways, right? You know that. So you're not helping anybody, really. And so why are you doing it? And Levinas is pondering this, and he's saying you must be doing it because you're seeing something there in that defective person, which is more than their defect, which is therefore, he calls it the trace of God. Are you guys following this second argument? Any questions on this second argument? Okay, so great. So yeah, so these are the two main arguments where Levinas is saying, right, God is, if we want to find God, right, we can find it in very ordinary human situations. You can see God, right? You can see God in the defective who needs your help, right? You can see God in the person who resists without knowing, right? Torture, right? God is to be found in very strange places, right? Or at least revelations of God, right? Levinas basically is saying, yes, I looked in the heavens from whence comes my help, right? And I didn't see anything there, to go against the psalm, right? You know, the famous psalm by David where he says, I look up until the hills, right? Where does my help come from? And then he continues, King David, right? He says, oh, my help comes from the Lord. Levinas, same scenario. I look up on the hills. Where does my help come from? No help. Right? No help. And so I look down below the hills, and here I see, rather than someone giving me help, I see the helpless. And at that moment, I see God, right? This is kind of the shift you have to make, right? Somebody please Google the psalm that I just quoted. I would love to have all of you read it, right? Just to show you the shift. I look upon the hills. I'm paraphrasing pitifully. I look upon the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. Please, someone find me that text. It's in the Psalms. I would appreciate it. And then just to show you the shift, right? Levinas would quote the same psalm and say, I look upon the, can't talk. I look upon the hills. Where does my help come from? My help does not come from the hills, right? Instead, I look, thank you, Courage Sheep, Psalm 121. I look down to the helpless, and that is where I now find God, right? I think Delmas had a question. Oh, Delmas. The argument from compassion all over again. Let me finish, and then I'll do it at the end again, I promise. Briefly, in one sentence, argument from compassion is, no, let me go further, and then I'll come back. Great. So that's what Levinas is doing, right? He's saying, don't look up, is not there. Look down, and there you will have strange visions, right? You will have revelations of God where you never thought you would, right? Imagine, I mean, you have to put yourself in the shoes of Levinas, right? Levinas has lost God, right? This is very similar to someone like Elie Wiesel, who emerges from the camps really struggling with agnosticism, even though they both had a religious background, right? So they have lost connection, touch with the God that they were taught, right? With the God that they knew as children, as adolescents. And what's going on here is that Levinas is having epiphanies, right? As though God is giving him flashes, right, of his presence, but now in strange places, in the scene of torture, in the scene of, irrational compassion. There he is sensing, right? Something is moving him to see God is still there, right? In that place. He's not completely obliterated. He's not in the heavens, but we can still find him in the debris, in the ruins of our civilization, right? Are you seeing the shift that is being made here? From a vertical connection, he's now shifting to a horizontal connection, right? Okay, and so now this brings us to the conclusions, right? Which is the response to Nietzsche, right? So let's see how we can use what we just learned to respond to Nietzsche. So first of all, we have to measure the I can't find my word. We have to measure how big the shift is that Levinas just made, right? Instead of seeing God as powerful and as the one who helps us, he's now seeing God as powerless and the one who needs our help. This is the shift he's making, right? Instead of thinking of God, God is out there powerful, helping us, comforting us, he's saying, no, God now is the one in need of comfort. That's the shift, right? God is no more the comforter. What Levinas, the vision Levinas is having of God, is of God now being the one who needs comfort. He is now in need to be comforted, right? This is, and remember, right, Levinas is simply writing about what he is seeing, right? These are intuitions he's getting, right? This whole powerful God vision is gone, but he's getting new visions, right? New intuitions, and he's sensing that God is no more the one who comforts. On the contrary, now, after the Holocaust, God is the one in need of comfort, right? He's no more the one who helps us. He's the one who needs our help. And this is the reversal you have to be able to make in order to really enter the post-Holocaust path, right? Spiritual path. Because remember, we cannot have a comforting God anymore because it simply didn't happen. It doesn't exist as far as Levinas is concerned, right? And we should be worried. If we still think of God like this, we should be worried because it didn't work for them. Why should it work for me, right? Or am I deluding myself that God prefers me to them, right? So Levinas is saying, we need to leave this behind. This is something we need to shed, right? The new vision of God we need to have now after the Holocaust, the only vision which for him is respectful of the victims of the Holocaust, is to now see God in need to be comforted rather than God as the one who comforts. Are you seeing the necessity of this shift? Put your hand in the screen if you're seeing why he's doing that, right? For him, it's an insult to the victim to still think of God as the comforter. Really? So he comforts you, but not us. Okay, great. That's a great God right there, right? So he's saying now, what I'm seeing or what I'm sensing is that even though that vision is crushed, they're still here. I'm still seeing, I'm having an epiphany of God as the one who needs to be comforted. And by the way, this is not far from traditional Judaism and traditional Christianity, right? The notion, you have in Judaism many comparisons of God with a stranger, right? God is seen as, or the stranger is seen as one of the manifestations of God, right? The stranger who is in need of food, of drink, right, is seen in Jewish tradition as the manifestation of God. In Christianity, you have the famous teaching by Jesus, right, who talks about in the end of times, I will recognize those who love me by their deeds. And so some people are like, but we know you. Why don't you recognize us? And he says, well, I was in prison. Did you visit me? I was hungry. Did you feed me? I was thirsty. Did you give me a drink? Right? He's identifying in that teaching with the oppressed, right? Saying, if you did anything to them, you did it to me. So this is not a new idea, right? What Levinas is teaching here. But he's emphasizing it because for him it's the only way left to connect to God after the Holocaust, right? You want to connect to God, connect to the downtrodden, right? Connect to each other. That's the way. Al-Haddai, tell us.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with them. At the same time, I don't understand it. So like, you see how God is powerful and strong, right? So like, why don't you just help them? This is so confusing. The whole thing makes no sense. So, like, how is God within them? You get it? Don't think?
So remember, God is within every human being, right? Not specifically within them, but it's, how shall I put it?
Like, within the powerless, the people who are suffering.
Yeah, God is in the disturbance, right? Just like the other. God is the other. So if it's your friends and you're hanging out and everybody's doing good, God is less obvious because there's no disturbance, right? Because God appears, right? Because he is other. Remember, we mentioned this at the beginning of class. He must disturb. So God is in the people who disturb us. That's what he's trying to say. It's not just the oppressed. It can be your spouse. It can be your child, right?
How do you comfort God?
What? Oh.
Why is it like the other way around?
Yeah, that's you're sensing the enormity of what he's doing, right? Well, basically what he's saying, if God now comes to us through the other, disturbs us through the other, the way we respond to the other is a way to access God, right? um, Let me explain it differently. Maybe I can explain it differently. Let me put it this way. I think it's impossible to really be in contact with God if you haven't known the disturbing other, right? Because when the others around you disturb you and you respond lovingly to them, right, something in you expands. And at that moment, remember Maimonides who talked about how we have to expand the mind to reach God? Well, here it's an existential expansion. It's an expansion of your heart, of your body, of your existence. So the more you allow the disturbing others to expand you, the more you're able to connect to God. Like Maimonides was saying, the mind has to expand so God can flow in it. In that way is another way to explain it. Does that make more sense, Al-Haddai?
Yeah, thank you.
So in that sense, if you still see God as a vertical God, right? Levinas doesn't, but that would be one way to see it. Okay, there's a couple questions. So, okay, Argitis, let me respond to you, and then I'll get Ahmad, right? So Argitis, yes. So he doesn't dismiss the existence of God. He dismisses the concept of God as powerful and comforting, right? He's not saying God doesn't exist. He's saying that God doesn't exist in the way that we have thought he exists, right? So he never stopped believing there is a God. He just saw, okay, this was a false representation. And now I'm sensing that God is more accurately encountered in my relationships. Does that make sense, Argitis? Okay, great. Ahmad, go ahead.
Levinas's philosophy of traces of God within individuals reminds me a lot of Hindu philosophy. Namely, when the greeting of Namaste, I bow to you. So in a way, like they recognize a drop of the divine in every person.
Absolutely, right? Excellent. Yeah, this is the same idea. Most religions, right, talk about this trace of the divine. It's just us in the 21st century who arrogantly deny it, right? In the name of what? I don't know. but we have a tendency to kind of like push all of these thoughts as obsolete. Like we're the only ones who know. So in that sense, right? But you have, yes, you have this idea all over. But Levinas now is trying to make a 21st century philosophical argument for it in order to convince his contemporaries who are French and secular and don't believe in the trace of God, right? So in that sense, right? So yeah, absolutely, very good. Yeah, you guys are reacting very well. Now, let me go back to Delmas, and I'm sure there's a bunch of others who still haven't understood the argument from compassion. Oh, sorry, Nietzsche. Quick, Nietzsche. Okay, now to respond to Nietzsche, right? Two things that Nietzsche accuses, right, religion of, right? So he sees religion as false comfort, right? And then he sees religion as escape from reality, right? Remember, those were the two accusations he makes in the text we studied. Now we see how Levinas might respond to both of these claims. Let me hear you. How does Levinas respond to the claim that religion is a false comfort that we create in our minds? How does Levinas respond to that? Anybody want to give it a try? Based on what we said today. Yes, you have to think a little bit. Ahmad, go ahead.
So in this instance, God isn't comforting us, we are comforting God.
Okay, very good, right? So Levinas is saying there is no comfort. On the contrary, I am disturbed, right? And this disturbance that is caused by what I'm seeing everywhere around me is causing me now to turn and comfort God. So you can write down, first of all, there is no comfort as far as living. God, in fact, disturbs us. Remember, we talked about this, right? God is the one who disturbs us, makes us uncomfortable, confused, like in the book of Job. And ultimately, right, it is no more God who comforts me in the worldview of Levinas, right? It is me who is called to comfort God. It is a difficult task of responsibility, right? That the spiritual path entails. True spirituality for Levinas is moving away from my comfort towards the discomfort of others, right? Let me write this down. True spirituality for Levinas, true religion, right, is a movement away from my comfort and the desire of it towards, right, the discomfort of others, right? So you can see how Nietzsche might be intrigued, at least, right? He might not yet be convinced, but he would be like, huh, okay, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that, right? He kind of like gives Nietzsche a little bit of a shock, right? By reversing it. Very good, Ahmad. What about the second one? Religion as escape. How does Levinas counter that? See who can do that. You have to think a little. I'm making you think. Don't disappoint me like that.
He says that religion is not an escape because we are the ones that have to confront things without God. That's what he, So we're not able to be comforted. Therefore, it can't be an escape.
Very good, right? He's saying religion is not an escape, but on the contrary, a hyper awareness, right? A hyper sensitivity to the world around us, right? Remember, for Levinas, no God unless you're aware of the other. You don't see God if you don't see the other. That's the idea here, right? You don't see God if you don't see the other. Remember who he's responding to, right? Remember the issue with Christianity during the Holocaust, right? Remember the pact that Christianity made with Hitler, including the Vatican. This is documented, right? That, okay, you leave us alone, we leave you alone, right? In other words, this belief that Christianity had at the time, that they could be Christians without looking at turning a blind eye to what's happening around them. This is the kind of the issue that Levinas is grappling with here when he says you can't be a Christian if you don't see what's happening around you. You can't be a spiritual person if you have no awareness of what's going on around you in the world. And so if you're trying to escape, that's a sign you're off the track. You're off the path. You're not, you've left, right? And so that's really, remember, that's in the background of his mind when he's saying you can't see God if you can't see the other. Don't think you can be spiritual and turn a blind eye to what is going on over here, right? That's the idea here. Okay, yes, I'm trying to see what you guys wrote in the chat. Okay, so now we have this, you wrote so many interesting things, right, in the chat. Okay, let's go now. Let me respond briefly to Delmas about, let me review the argument from compassion, right? Okay, so normally in the way we describe human beings, we say that we are compassionate not because of morality or religion, but because it is good for preserving the species, right? In this case, it doesn't work, this argument, right? Because you are now trying to help people who are deficient. What Levinas witnessed in the camp were people who were strong and who were giving their bread to people who were about to die, elderly, right? And so there is no logic for this, right? Even in the animal kingdom, they don't do that, right? There is no preservation of the species because actually you're going against that, because instead of, letting them die who are deficient and strengthening yourself so you can reproduce, right? You're now taking the bread, both of you are gonna die at the end of this, right? So this is irrational. That's what Levinas is saying. This is irrational. There is no argument from instinct or evolutionary argument or preservation of the species, right? Or some kind of selfishness deep down, because everybody's gonna die because of this action, right? So Levinas is saying, okay, this is irrational, doesn't make any sense. What are you seeing that's propelling you to give your bread? And Levinas is saying right there, you are seeing the infinite value of that human being even though they're deficient, they have infinite value and must live, right? And in that which you are seeing, that's the trace of God. Delmas, better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Okay, this is a really hard topic. You guys are doing so well. Like you're really getting it. I'm really proud of you. You almost took away my bad mood. How good you guys are today. So nice, very nice. You guys are really getting some really heavy stuff, right? This is not easy. Great. So any questions? All good? Next time we meet, which is Wednesday, I believe I will introduce you to Simone Weil. No assignments, you have a little break. And then next week we'll finish Simone Weil. So enjoy the rest of your week. And whoever still has questions, you can stay. The rest of you can go.